The prairie stretched endless and empty, gold and gray under a sky the color of iron. Dust clung to the boots of a man who hadn't spoken in days, hadn't needed to. He walked alone, his coat trailing behind him like the shadow of a past too heavy to carry. His name was Calder Nash, and he didn't believe in second chances anymore. Not since the fire, not since the war, not since the woman he'd buried and the badge he'd thrown into a river 10 towns back. He'd wandered ever since, never staying, never asking, never remembering longer than necessary. He wasn't looking for salvation. He was just looking for somewhere the memories didn't follow. But fate wasn't through with him. Not yet. Calder crested a low ridge as the sun dipped westward, casting long shadows across the broken fences and rotted beams of a half-collapsed barn down in the valley. He almost passed it, just another ruin on a road full of them. But something made him stop. A sound. Faint. Desperate. Whimpering. He slid down the slope, boots quiet against the dry grass. His hand went to the revolver on his hip, thumb brushing the hammer. He reached the barn's side wall where slats of wood peeled from years of sun and wind. He pressed his back to it and listened. Then he heard it again, a child's cry. He stepped inside and froze. There, tied together with thick rope in the middle of a hay-strewn floor, were 6 children. Dirty, shaking, silent from fear, too exhausted to scream anymore. And beside them, her arms looped through the same knots, sat a woman, hair matted, eyes alert, defiant despite the blood on her sleeve. She stared at Calder as if trying to decide whether he was salvation or another nightmare. He crouched slowly, pulling out a knife. "Easy," he said, voice low, rough from disuse. "I ain't here to hurt you." The children shrank back, but the woman didn't flinch. "Then cut the rope. Fast. They might be coming back." He did. The blade sliced through the bindings, and the children scrambled behind the woman like she was the only shield they had left in the world. Calder helped her stand, but she winced, one leg clearly twisted, her ankle badly swollen. "Name?" he asked. "Claire," she said. "Claire Halden." He nodded once. "I'm Calder." She looked him over. "You're not from around here." "No," he said. "I was just passing." Claire looked towards the open door, her jaw tightening. "Then you picked a hell of a time to stop walking." Outside, hooves thundered in the distance. Whoever tied up those children was coming back. And Calder Nash had a choice. Leave, or do something he hadn't done in a long time. Stand and fight. The moment Claire heard the hoofbeats, her arms instinctively went around the smallest girl beside her. A fragile-looking child with straw blonde hair and hollow eyes. Calder could see her heart beating fast, though her face stayed still. "How many men?" he asked, voice low. Claire didn't hesitate. 3, maybe 4. Last time I saw 'em, 2 had rifles. Calder's eyes flicked to the far corner of the barn where shadows met the loose boards. "Any place the children can hide?" "There's a feed bin behind the old stalls. Bottom's hollow." "Good," he said. "Take 'em. Stay low." Claire hissed as she tried to move, her ankle too swollen to bear weight. Calder didn't wait. He lifted her easily, surprisingly gently for a man who looked like he was carved from worn leather and regret. "I can manage," she said, trying not to look weak. He ignored her and set her down near the bin. "Let the kids crawl in first. Don't let 'em cry, no matter what they hear." She nodded once, holding his gaze longer than he expected. "Why are you helping?" He paused. Then, "Because I know what it's like to lose everything." By the time the children were hidden, Calder had returned to the open doorway. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the hills, painting the land in long shadows. The riders were close, too close. He stepped out into the dirt yard, every movement quiet, measured. 3 men on horseback appeared over the ridge. They weren't lawmen. Their hats were too wide, their vests too clean. One of them carried a long-barreled rifle with casual arrogance. Another chewed something and spat with each clop of his horse's hooves. The man in the middle, older, cruel-looking, with a scar across his mouth, slowed to a stop when he saw Calder. "Well now," the scarred man said. "Who the hell are you?" "Just passing," Calder replied. "This ain't your barn." Calder's voice didn't rise. "Wasn't yours either." The men chuckled, but their eyes narrowed. Scar grinned. "We left a little something in there, you see her?" Calder didn't move. "Saw a rope, don't see any women." The man to Scar's left leaned forward. "You got no idea who you're talking to, friend." "I know enough," Calder said. Then he added with calm that chilled the wind, "If you turn around now, I won't bury 3 more men tonight." That stopped the laughter. The standoff was sudden. Rifles raised. Calder's hand went to his side. One heartbeat passed. Then gunfire tore through the silence. When it ended, the dust settled slowly. 2 of the men lay still, one in the dirt, one slumped over his horse's saddle. The last, Scar, was crawling, blood pouring from his thigh. Calder walked over slowly, boots dragging slightly in the soil. Scar glared up. "She's mine. That woman, the kids." "She's no one's," Calder said, voice cold. Then he turned and walked back to the barn without another word. Claire had seen it all through a crack in the wall. She watched Calder return, breathing hard but not shaken. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. He leaned against the doorframe, his shadow stretching behind him. "No, but someone did." That night they lit no fire. The children slept close to Claire on the hay, and Calder sat just outside the barn, staring into the wind. His past had burned behind him long ago, but tonight he had done something different. He'd stayed, and that was new. Dawn broke over the prairie with a soft gold glow, lighting the dust motes in the air like floating embers. The barn smelled of hay and old wood, silence pressing in like a held breath. Calder hadn't slept. He sat outside on a fallen beam, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the horizon like a man who expected trouble would return before breakfast. Inside, Claire stirred awake slowly, her ankle still throbbing but better wrapped now thanks to the strips of Calder's undershirt and an old splint he'd rigged. The children were curled around her like stray pups, safe for the first time in days. She listened a moment before whispering, "He's still here." It surprised her. Men like Calder didn't stay. They passed through like wind, left nothing behind. She shifted carefully, biting back the pain, and limped out to the barn's edge. Calder didn't look at her right away. He just said, "You should rest. That ankle's gonna slow you." Claire leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "You expecting more trouble?" "Always," he paused. "But maybe not today." She squinted toward to the east where only grass and wind waited. "So what happens now?" Calder was silent a long time, then, "You tell me. This your land?" Claire shook her head. "No. Belonged to my late husband's brother. He left it behind when he ran south. I was bringing the kids west to a cousin. Got stopped 2 days out by those men. Said they were bounty riders looking for someone. Didn't care we weren't him." She looked down. "They took everything. Horses, food, even our names." Calder turned to her then. "They won't take them again." Claire met his gaze. "Why'd you really stop, Calder? It wasn't the whimpering. A man like you hears plenty of that in his past." He looked away. "Because I heard it, and I didn't keep walking." Later that morning, Calder went into town. It was a place called Redstone, the kind of speck on a map most people rode straight through. It had a feed store, a crooked saloon, and a sheriff's office with a chair that had more dust on it than justice. Calder didn't go to the saloon. He went straight to the feed store. He bought oats, dried meat, a small tin of coffee, and a new roll of bandage wrap. The shopkeeper eyed him. "You settling out here?" Calder didn't answer right away. Then, maybe. Back at the barn, Claire was tending to the children when the smallest, the blonde girl named Junie, pointed to the hay pile. "Miss Claire," she said softly, "there's a box here." Claire hobbled over and pushed aside the old hay. Beneath it, they found a locked chest, iron hinges, government stamp on the side, and a chain around the middle. Claire stared at it. "What on earth?" Inside was something left behind, something not meant to be found. Calder returned just before sunset, leading a mule with supplies. Claire was waiting. "You found food," she said. "You found a box," he replied. They looked at each other for a long time. She lifted her chin toward the hay. "Help me open it?" Calder knelt, pulling the tool from his saddlebag. A few strikes, a twist, and the chain fell free. The lid creaked open. Inside, papers, sealed documents, a badge with a broken star, and a photograph. 6 children, 1 woman, and a man in uniform. Claire's voice trembled. "That's my husband, but this—" She looked up at Calder. "Why would someone bury this?" Calder stared at the badge, then at the old stamp burned into the underside of the lid. "Federal Protection Division." His jaw tightened. "This wasn't a barn," he said. "It was a safe house." And suddenly everything felt less simple. The riders hadn't been looking for someone. They'd been looking for what was hidden. And now, Calder and Claire were standing right in the middle of it. Calder held the photograph in one hand, the broken badge in the other. His face, normally set like old stone, now shifted, creased deeper by a memory he hadn't expected to surface. Claire leaned in, staring at the man in the photograph. "That's Robert," she said. "My husband. But this badge—" Calder turned the star over. The back was scorched, blackened, but a few letters remained etched into the metal. U.S. Federal Protection Division, Field Classified. He exhaled, slow. "This ain't just some farm. It was a place the government used to stash people." Claire's eyebrows lifted. "Like a hideout?" Calder nodded. "For witnesses. Or worse, assets. People with knowledge someone didn't want walking around in daylight." Her voice caught. "Robert never told me." "He couldn't," Calder said simply. They make 'em swear silence or sign it in blood. She looked at him carefully. How do you know all that? A silence fell. Then Calder stood, walked over to the open barn door and looked out over the plains. Because I used to wear a badge like that. The fire crackled low that night, tucked behind a wall of hay to keep the glow hidden. The children slept again, but Claire couldn't. Not after what they'd found. Not after what Calder had said. You were with them? She asked, sitting beside him as he sipped from a dented tin mug. He didn't answer right away. I was. Until I wasn't, he finally said. They had rules, codes, promises that sounded like protection. But all they really protected was themselves. He glanced sideways at her. I was assigned to a mission down in Texas. Cartel trafficking. We were told to protect a witness, a woman. She never made it to court. Claire's voice softened. What happened? We were told to pull out. They said she was compromised, just left her there. He looked away. I didn't pull out, I stayed. Tried to get her across the border myself. Claire could already hear where it was going. She didn't make it either. He gave a bitter laugh. I did, and they didn't even ask how. By dawn, the weight of the secret chest sat between them both like a loaded gun. Claire examined the documents more carefully. Some were signed under aliases, others stamped with government insignia faded beyond recognition. But one paper stood out. It was newer, a letter addressed to Robert Langston, her late husband, dated just 6 months before his death. Claire read aloud, her voice shaking. Due to increased movement near your assigned coordinates, we recommend activation of Phase D protocols. In the event of breach, all non-essential assets must be surrendered. Priority remains the children. She lowered the paper. What's Phase D? She asked. Calder's voice dropped. It means evacuation, at any cost. Claire blinked hard. Robert knew. He knew they'd come back. And he didn't run, Calder said. No, she whispered. He hit us. Then he died before he could tell me why. Later that morning, Calder and Claire took the box and buried it again, this time deeper, beneath a section of collapsed fencing on the west edge of the property. Covered it in earth, then in silence. What happens when they come again? She asked. He looked at her. Then they'll find something different waiting. Claire watched him work, saw the way his hands trembled slightly after placing the badge in the soil. You don't owe us anything, Calder. He looked up, quiet. I do now. That night, Junie, sleepy-eyed and quiet, climbed onto Calder's lap without asking. She looked up at him and whispered, You're not scary. And for the first time in years, Calder Holt smiled. Not because he felt safe, but because someone else finally did. The sun was low, casting long red shadows across the dried grassland, when Calder saw them. 3 riders. Too clean for ranchers, too slow for travelers, too quiet for locals. They weren't coming to trade. They were coming to look. He didn't move. Not yet. Just stood at the barn's edge, rifle leaning against the wall, eyes following every detail. How the man in front had a polished boot but a dusty coat. How the second rider never looked up, just stared at the trail. The third, too young, but twitchy like a green soldier waiting for orders. Claire stepped up behind him, holding Junie on her hip. You see something? He didn't answer. She followed his gaze. Her arms tightened around the child. Do you know them? She asked quietly. Not yet, Calder said, but they know this place. He stepped forward slowly and grabbed his rifle. The men didn't approach the barn. They stayed at a distance just outside the edge of the property, still on horseback. The leader lifted a hand in greeting. Not too friendly, not too forced. Evening, he called. Calder stayed still. Evening. The man shifted in the saddle. We're looking for someone. Aren't we all? Calder replied dryly. That earned a faint smirk. Funny, real funny. The second man finally spoke, voice flat. We heard a woman came through here, with children. Thought maybe they were squatting. Government land and all. This land's abandoned, Calder replied. And I don't recall asking Washington what to do with my fence. A pause. You alone? The lead rider asked. Calder's eyes didn't move. That depend. You looking for trouble? No, sir, the rider said with a grin. Trouble's what happens when folks hide things they shouldn't. They left without another word. But not before the twitchy one at the back stared just a second too long at the barn's west fence, the exact place where the chest was buried. Calder waited until their dust cloud faded before going back inside. Claire was pacing. Who were they? Fed hounds, Calder muttered. Private, not official. But they work for someone who's nervous. They're coming back, aren't they? He nodded once. Next time they won't ask first. That night, Calder moved the children to the old storm cellar beneath the barn. He rigged a small hatch under hay bales, made sure they could be safe even if someone came with guns blazing. Claire watched him work. You always think like this? Only when I care enough to plan, he answered without looking up. She didn't respond at first, then, why do you care? He finally looked at her. His voice was low. Because someone once left a woman to fend for herself, and I swore I wouldn't make the same mistake twice. In the dark cellar that night, Junie whispered to her brother, "Are we going to run again?" "No," he whispered back. "Not this time. He's not going to let them." Upstairs, Calder sat by the barn door with his rifle and a quiet resolve carved into his face like an old scar. He had made peace with the ghosts in his past. Now he would face the ones still coming. The air was still. Too still. Even the crickets had fallen silent. Calder sat at the edge of the barn loft, watching the faint shimmer of moonlight over the dry fields. His rifle rested across his lap, cleaned and loaded. A quiet hum buzzed behind his thoughts, something half forgotten. The instincts of a man who once tracked killers across borders, who once kicked in doors for a government that didn't care about the people inside them. But tonight, it wasn't about orders. It was about the children below, about Claire, about keeping the past from repeating itself. Around midnight, the first sound came. Crunch, a boot step. Then another. Calder shifted his weight slightly, leaned forward. Shadows moved near the fence line. 3 figures. They weren't bothering with pretense anymore. No hellos, no smiles, no fake questions about land ownership. They were here to search and take, and silence. Down below, Claire waited in the storm cellar. She held Junie tight against her chest, one arm wrapped protectively around the other children. They could hear muffled footsteps above them. Wood creaked. A light beam slid across a gap in the floorboards. Claire didn't speak, didn't breathe, just prayed. Above, Calder let the first man get close, too close. When the intruder reached the center of the barn and started pulling back hay with his boot, Calder dropped silently from the loft, landing behind him like a shadow given form. He grabbed the man's shoulder. "You lost?" Calder asked, voice a razor in the dark. The man spun around, but too late. Crack! The butt of Calder's rifle met his jaw and dropped him flat. Outside, a voice shouted, "You hear that?" Calder stepped into the doorway, aiming into the night. "Back away," he called, "before you meet the same end." The second man fired once. The bullet struck the barn wall inches from Calder's head. That was all he needed. He raised the rifle and fired back. Clean, precise, not to kill but to warn. The second shot hit the dirt near the man's feet. The third snapped through the brim of his hat. The man screamed and stumbled back, falling into the dry grass. "Get the hell out of here!" Calder roared. The third man, the twitchy one from earlier, panicked. He turned, tripped, and ran full speed back to the trail. The wounded man followed. The unconscious one lay groaning, too dazed to move. Calder walked up and loomed over him. "You tell whoever sent you," he said slowly, "that the woman and the children are under my roof now, and I don't give up what's mine." Minutes later, the cellar hatch creaked open. Claire looked up, face pale. "Is it over?" "For now," Calder said. "They'll think twice before trying again." "But they will try again." "Yeah," he nodded. "They will." That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She sat with Calder outside the barn, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sky shift from black to gray. "You should have run," she whispered, "before this became your fight." "I've run enough," he said, then added quieter, "and maybe I finally found something worth standing still for." Claire turned to him. "You mean the children?" He looked back at her. "I mean all of it." The morning came with frost biting the tips of the sagebrush and the quiet weight of a decision yet to be made. Calder stood at the edge of the porch, surveying the land with narrowed eyes. Beyond the hills, the men who had come for Claire were likely regrouping, plotting, lying, waiting for orders from someone they didn't dare disappoint. Inside the barn, Claire was wrapping Junie in layers of old cotton as the other children ate from a pot of oats Calder had cooked that morning. Quiet, grateful, still unsure of how long this peace would last. She hadn't spoken much since the night. But now, as Calder re-entered the barn, she stood near the corner where the rotted floor had once covered the old storm cellar. "We need to leave," she said. He leaned his rifle against the doorway. "And go where?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But staying here means they'll come back. Next time with more men. More guns. Maybe with a marshal's signature forged on a paper that makes it legal." Calder crossed his arms. "You think they'll care what's legal?" Claire looked at him, then knelt beside the dirt floor. She brushed away a thick layer of dust and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. Calder stepped closer. "What's that?" "A map," she whispered. "My husband. Before he died, he hid this. Said it wasn't just about gold. It was about what the land held, what someone else wanted to bury forever." Calder crouched beside her. The paper was yellowed but intact. Hand-drawn lines traced rivers, outcroppings, and a shaded circle near a canyon cliff. He traced it with one finger. "This isn't just about you or the kids," he said. "No," she said quietly. "It's about what they're willing to do to keep this from being found." That night, Calder lit the barn lantern and laid the map flat on the table. Claire stood beside him, arms folded. "What is this place?" he asked. "They called it Dead Hollow," she said. "No one lives near it. It's where the ranchers used to dump livestock during droughts, but deep in the canyon. There's an old site. Maybe Comanche, maybe older. My husband said there were carvings. Bones. Maybe something sacred." Calder looked at the lines again. "And now someone in the government wants it gone." She nodded. "Or hidden." "Then we go," he said. Claire stared. "You'd come with us?" He didn't hesitate. "I started this ride with no destination. Now I got one." He looked at the children, huddled quietly in the far corner of the barn. "Let's give them somewhere to belong." The next morning, Claire packed what little food they had left while Calder saddled the horses. He gave the unconscious man from 2 nights before a canteen and a warning, then left him under a tree near the road out. "We're going to Dead Hollow?" the oldest boy asked. "Yeah," Calder said, "we are. But it's called Dead Hollow." Calder smiled just a little. "Then maybe it's time someone brought it back to life." They rode out before dawn. The wind cut sharp across the plains, brushing over the high grass like ghost fingers. Claire sat atop Calder's second horse with Junie in her arms, the older children on the borrowed mule trailing behind, bundled tight in wool blankets that smelled of hay and thyme. Calder led them with a quiet, focused calm, eyes scanning the horizon, heart pounding with more than just the threat of pursuit. He had made a choice, and choices, once made, had a way of chasing you. Dead Hollow lay 2 days' ride through the low valleys and dust-choked ridges west of the basin. The map, folded safely in Calder's satchel, pointed to a forgotten canyon rim hidden behind the teeth of a jagged rock formation known only by its old name, the Devil's Knuckles. Claire leaned forward slightly in the saddle. "You've heard of this place?" Calder didn't look back. "Once. A long time ago. During the war, men said spirits wandered out there. Fires burned without flame. Cattle were found drained dry." "Stories?" she asked. "Everything's a story until it happens to you," he replied. They made camp by a frozen creek that night. Calder dug a fire pit deep into the dirt and used a scrap of canvas to keep the smoke low. He wasn't taking chances. If those men had trackers, the smallest ember could betray them. The children were asleep by the time Claire sat beside him, the firelight flickering across her worn face. "You don't ask many questions," she said. "I used to," he answered. "Didn't like the answers." She turned to him. "So why help us?" Calder stared into the flames. "Because you didn't run," he said simply. "And because something about this feels like the first thing in years that isn't about guilt." Claire hesitated. Then softly, "Maybe we're both looking for the same thing." He glanced at her. "And what's that?" "Forgiveness." At dawn, they continued on. The terrain grew harder. Steeper hills, twisted trails barely wide enough for a single horse. The children grew quieter, sensing the weight of where they were heading. It wasn't just about running anymore. It was about finding something hidden, something sacred. They reached the base of the Devil's Knuckles by mid-afternoon. Jagged red stone rose into the sky, splintered like giant bones. Calder dismounted and pulled the map. Claire pointed to a crevice between 2 spines of rock. "There," she said. Calder turned to the children. "Stay close, no wandering, no sounds." The wind howled through the canyon, whispering ancient secrets in tongues no longer spoken. As they passed between the rocks, something shifted, not just the air. The feeling. Claire shivered. "It's colder here." Calder nodded, adjusting his grip on the rifle. "Something's watching." They descended into the hollow, and before them stretched a hidden basin surrounded by cliffs. At its center, the remains of an old stone structure half buried by time and silence. The boy whispered, "Is that it?" Claire nodded. "It's more than a ruin." Calder stepped forward, kneeling near an entrance carved into the stone. Symbols lined the doorway, weathered but still visible. He traced one with his fingers. "It's a warning," he muttered, "not a welcome." Claire's voice trembled. "Then we need to know what it says, before they find us again." The stone entrance loomed like a mouth. Claire held Junie tighter, instinct screaming that this place, though hidden and sacred, was not safe. Calder ran his hand once more over the ancient carvings. The edges of the symbols were sharp, deliberately so. This wasn't language meant to tell a story. It was a warning. They ventured into the chamber together. Calder first, lantern lifted high, rifle slung at his back. Claire followed, eyes adjusting to the cool darkness. The older children waited outside by the ridge with strict instructions. Don't move. Don't speak. Don't follow. The air inside smelled like earth and ashes. Claire whispered, "This doesn't feel like it was built by ranchers." "No," Calder agreed. "This is older, way older." At the center of the room was an altar. Rough stone, but covered in something different. Metal. Not gold, not silver. Etched plates, like pieces of a broken shield, arranged into a spiral. Claire touched one, and it vibrated under her fingers. "That's not normal," Calder muttered, stepping beside her. She looked up at him. "My husband said this wasn't just a burial site. He said this was kept hidden by the government because it belonged to someone else first. Not us. Not the Comanche. Not anyone living." She swallowed. "He said it predated all of it." Calder frowned. "Why the chains, Claire? Why were you chained to a stove in a dying house?" She hesitated. The flickering lantern light reflected in her eyes. "Because he told someone," she said. "And they came for him. And when he was gone, they came for me. They wanted me silent." "And the children?" "They were witnesses." Suddenly the wind outside shifted. A hollow boom echoed across the canyon. Calder turned sharply toward the entrance. "Someone's here." He rushed out. Claire followed. From the ridge, the oldest boy was shouting, "Riders, 5 or 6, coming fast!" Calder knelt, lifted his rifle, and stared through the scope. Hooves kicked up dirt in the distance. Men in dusters, one with a bandana over his face, rifles across their saddles. "They found us," Calder muttered. Claire's voice was calm but urgent. "Then we make them regret it." Back inside the chamber, Claire gathered the plates into a burlap sack, careful not to scrape them against each other. The metal pulsed faintly. "What if it's not just a map?" she asked aloud. "What if it's proof that what we built this country on was never truly ours?" Calder looked down at her. "Then they'll burn it all to keep that secret." That night, they made a barricade of rocks and logs near the canyon mouth. Calder set traps on both trails leading in. Claire loaded a revolver with shaking hands. "I won't run this time," she said. "Not again." Calder placed a hand on her shoulder. "You never did." In the final moments before the riders arrived, the children hid in the back of the cave. Claire stood at the threshold, heart pounding. Calder crouched behind the barricade, eye on the ridge. Dust rose in the distance. The sound of hooves in vengeance echoed across Dead Hollow. And then they came. The riders didn't hesitate. They came like shadows torn loose from dusk. 6 men in black dusters, faces covered, rifles ready, boots slamming the earth in rhythm. Calder stood firm behind the barricade, his rifle loaded and steady. Claire crouched behind him, revolver in hand, heart racing not just with fear but with resolve. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about truth. And they would not bury it again. The first shot cracked the silence. Calder fired. One of the horses reared, its rider thrown into the dirt. The others fanned out, circling the barricade from both sides. Calder reloaded fast. Claire took aim, her hands shaking but her eyes sharp. Bang! A second rider tumbled, groaning, clutching his side, but they kept coming. One man reached the outer ridge and fired a burning shot toward the cave. It sparked against the rocks. Claire ran toward the children, pulling them deeper into the hollow. The youngest whimpered, but no one cried out. They knew better. This wasn't the first time fear had come for them. Calder ducked low as the bullet grazed the stone behind him. Dust burst into the air. He cursed under his breath, then rolled, fired again, crack, and another rider fell. But they were close now. Too close. Suddenly Claire reappeared, eyes burning. She carried the burlap sack, the one with the metal plates. "They want this!" she shouted, holding it high. The lead rider slowed his horse, aiming at her chest. "Drop it!" he barked. She didn't. Instead, she threw it. Not at him. Into the fire pit. The sack hit the embers. And the plates, those ancient humming plates, reacted. A low hum echoed through the rocks. Symbols on the canyon walls lit up, glowing faintly blue. The wind roared, unnatural, whipping through the hollow like a living thing. The remaining men staggered, their horses panicking beneath them. "What the hell is that?" one shouted. Calder shielded his face. "Claire, what did you do?" She was crying now, not from fear, but from release. "I didn't do anything," she said. "It's waking up." The last rider turned and fled. The rest were on the ground, disarmed, stunned by the light, the sound, the presence they could not explain. Calder pulled Claire behind the rocks just as the final surge of wind lifted dust into the sky. And then, silence. The glow faded. The plates cooled. Only ashes remained in the fire pit. And in their place, burned into the stone, was a new symbol. Claire stared at it. A circle. Inside it, 7 small dots. The children emerged slowly from the cave, eyes wide. "It's over?" one asked. Calder looked out at the bodies, the empty ridge. "Not yet," he said. "But we've bought time." That night, they buried the dead and burned the weapons. Calder stood watch on the ridge until dawn.
Claire slept near the children, one arm draped protectively around Junie. When the sun rose, Calder came down from the ridge and sat beside her. She didn't ask what he'd seen. He didn't ask what she'd dreamed. They just sat. Two people no longer running. Two people finally standing where no one else dared to stand. Epilogue. Weeks later, they returned to the basin, this time with allies, ranchers, Comanche elders, journalists from far-off towns, people who believed in truth. And those metal plates? They weren't just evidence of the past. They were the beginning of a new story, one no longer written in chains but in freedom.